The year 2005 was something of a watershed moment in the history of Spider-Man. Since the beginning, he had always characterized himself as a loner, someone who just wasn't a team player, but that was all about to change, as now he was about to become a member of the newest incarnation of the Avengers.
The event that brought about the founding of the new Avengers was a riot breaking out at the S.H.I.E.L.D. supervillain prison, The Raft, after a power outage caused by longtime Spider-Man nemesis Electro. Several major villains managed to escape, and the Avengers were supposedly tracking down those villains to rearrest them.
I say supposedly because, well, they didn't really do that in the next story arc. Outside of a brief encounter with longtime Thor nemesis, the Wrecker, which was only noteworthy because of a scene where Jessica Drew Spider-Woman explained that due to her pheromonal control powers, she is the living embodiment of the old Robert Palmer song, I Didn't Mean to Turn You On.
Instead, the duty of wrangling the Raft escapees would fall to Spider-Man, but not exactly in any of his ongoing titles, even though there were like 5 or 6, or was it 7?
Okay, just for the sake of ease, we're going to limit this down to the core Spider books. We're not going to cover things like the bi-monthly anthology Spider-Man Unlimited, or Marvel Team Up, which is really just a Spider-Man Team Up book, or the new volume of Amazing Fantasy, which was really just being used to launch the character of Anya Corazon.
The core Spider books consisted of 3, or maybe I should say 4, actual titles. First, there was the main book, The Amazing Spider-Man, which was in the middle of a long-term story being written by writer J. Michael Straczynski, involving the Wallcrawler taking on an energy vampire named Morlun. Next was Marvel Knights Spider-Man, soon to be rechristened Sensational Spider-Man, which had just wrapped up a major story arc involving Mac Gargan, aka the Scorpion, abducting Aunt May after acquiring the Venom symbiote. Third was Spectacular Spider-Man, which actually had the most connection to the new Avengers storylines that were running at the time, but that book was cancelled and replaced by the 4th book, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man.
In reality, though, none of this is relevant, as Marvel was gearing up for a massive story arc called The Other, which would be running through all 3 Spider-Man books and feature the climactic battle against Morlun. Instead, Spider-Man's pursuit of the Raft escapees would be shunted off to its own 5-issue miniseries, which is what we're looking at today. From the pages of New Avengers, this is Spider-Man Breakout.
At S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Supermax prison in Colorado, the Vault, Simon Utrecht, aka Vector of the UFOs, is agitated at William Cross, the mercenary Crossfire, as the latter returns from a meeting with the Warden. Cross denies going through any shenanigans, but Vector isn't fully sure as the Warden calls out his name next. Vector's suspicions prove pretty accurate as the Warden, one Rosalind Backus, informs the villain that, yes, she's aware that he has been plotting something with Crossfire and some others, but that's not going to happen as now both villain groups are being transferred to the Raft, the newly constructed super prison in New York City. However, any of this is not really any concern to her as Backus is now taking early retirement. Jumping ahead 2 years to the power outage/prison riot from New Avengers, the UFOs spot Crossfire and several cronies, the Corruptor, Controller, Mandrill, and Mr. Fear, using the prison riot to sneak away. Crossfire explains to his group that he knows Vector isn't the one who sold them out, it was someone else, and he needs to try to track them down to get their proper revenge. However, unbeknownst to Crossfire, the UFOs are falling from behind.
We'll tackle Crossfire and his gang a little bit later. For now, let's focus on the UFOs, who are quite possibly one of the most underrated supervillain teams out there. The UFOs are basically just an attempt by billionaire industrialist Simon Utrecht to recreate the Fantastic Four. Simon even went as far as to rope in his fiancée Anne, her younger brother Jimmy, and a pilot named Mike Steele. Now the group willingly exposed themselves to cosmic radiation, and thanks to the craft they were in, that was actually an intensified cosmic radiation. However, this resulted in a near-total physical mutation. Basically, none of them can really pass for being human anymore, or in other words, they're all effectively the Thing. Now, Simon became Vector with the ability to repel matter, Anne became Vapor, which is pretty self-explanatory, Jimmy became X-Ray, basically a large radioactive human torch, and Mike became Ironclad, which is also kind of self-explanatory.
3 weeks later, and both the UFOs and Crossfire's gang are scouring New York City looking for this turncoat who sold them out, while also trying to rip out each other's throats. Meanwhile, Peter Parker likes to go out and try to see if he can catch any of these escapees, even though he's still mending from a broken arm he received from the prison riot. Mary Jane wants Peter to call in the other Avengers, but he's not exactly sure he's part of the team yet. Spidey immediately notices the two groups battling out in the streets of Brooklyn, and he heads over where he notices Mr. Fear and the Controller tracking X-Ray's radiation signature. The Wallcrawler manages to make Mr. Fear blast the Controller with his fear gun gas, which causes the latter to leap off the roof and crash into a car below. Spider-Man then whips a rebound net to make Mr. Fear blast himself next. Mr. Fear is down, but the Controller has slipped away alongside everyone else as S.H.I.E.L.D., Iron Man, and Captain America soon arrive.
The Controller is Basil Sandhurst, a former research scientist who was obsessed with mind control, who got caught in a lab explosion that bonded him to an exoskeleton that has the ability to fire mind control discs. Once the disc latches onto someone, the Controller can, well, control him. Now, Mr. Fear, on the other hand, is a longtime Daredevil villain who has a gun that shoots a gas that causes a fight or flight response in its victims. Now, the original Mr. Fear was a man named Zoltan Drago. After that was a man named Star Saxon, then a man named Larry Cranston, and the current incarnation is named Alan Fagan. And if you haven't noticed, Crossfire seems to have a common thread running through a lot of his gang members.
Cap isn't too pleased with Spider-Man. The situation was clearly too much for one person to handle, but he didn't call in for backup. Peter has to learn that if he's going to be part of a team, it's okay to ask for help when it's needed. Knowing that they need to figure out why exactly these two groups are fighting one another like this, the two head back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier to look up the prison records. They turn up the incident at the vault, but sadly Rosalind Backus just isn't available as she died in a car accident shortly after the transfer. However, Spider-Man has his suspicions, and since official channels seemingly have dried up, maybe the back door could work instead. He calls Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat, much to MJ's chagrin, and has her employer, the Owl, look for anything on Rosalind Backus. Due to much of his territory being destroyed by the two super gangs fighting, the crime boss is more than willing to help, and he turns up something rather interesting. Rosalind Backus is still alive, living in New York City, and running an apartment building for single mothers.
Now, this does bring up an interesting question. If Rosalind Backus knew that the raft was located in New York City, and that was where she was transferring these two gangs who obviously carry a grudge against her too, why would she then set up shop in New York City? I mean, wouldn't it have been more fortuitous for her to, say, be in Chicago, Los Angeles, or even Boston or Philadelphia? I mean, at least then, if they escape, you could set up some type of parameters, you could alert S.H.I.E.L.D., you could do something to try to protect yourself.
The UFOs have their own means for tracking down Rosalind Backus. They stop by Utrecht Industry headquarters and take the new CEO, Cortland, hostage. It turns out that a lot of Vector's tax shelter funds have mysteriously gone missing, and if Cortland didn't take them, then who did? However, Backus wasn't an idiot and spread the money out across 50 different shell corporations, so they needed to just track down the main one. Once Cortland tracks down that address, the UFOs are off. However, there's no real rest for the lackey, as soon Crossfire and his gang come barging into the company.
Crossfire's other two accomplices include Jackson Day, a pharmaceutical engineer who was working at a psychotropic drug factory which caught on fire and exposed him to various chemicals. This caused him to give him the ability to manipulate people's emotions via the contact through his sweat. This is why he's called the Corruptor. He can make a good person do evil things. After that is Jerome Beecham, who was born a mutant in the form of a humanoid mandrill character, so he's called the Mandrill, and he actually has pheromonal controls, much like Spider-Woman, meaning, yeah, he's pretty much just a sex criminal.
Spider-Man actually beats the UFOs, what is supposedly Rosalind Backus' home address. However, the building just seems never to have even been lived in at all. Looking for any information turned up an article about the new apartment complex for single mothers with Backus' picture, which matched her S.H.I.E.L.D. ID card. He goes to confront her where he notices a rather familiar-looking picture on the wall.
Rosalind Backus was actually a colleague of William Cross, the man who became Crossfire. She believed that he was part of a CIA group that was interested in utilizing a machine she developed that would emit ultrasonic frequencies to possibly make violent criminals more docile. The two fell in love and even got engaged, and it was then that Cross revealed his true colors by staging his murder and framing Rosalind for it. He then stole the equipment to use for his own personal means, while Rosalind was sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, when Cross popped up in his new cybernetically enhanced form of Crossfire, they realized he obviously wasn't dead and she was released. She would subsequently join S.H.I.E.L.D. and wind up running the Vault, which immediately led her back to her ex.
Back at Utrecht Industries, Crossfire knows that Cortland gave the UFOs a dummy address and coerces the real address by threatening his staff. After Cortland acquiesces, Corruptor has the CEO kill his entire staff and then himself. Later, a dying Cortland tells the returning UFOs the actual address as well. Meanwhile, Rosalind finishes her story to Spider-Man by explaining that she poses a corrupt security guard at the vault to lure the UFOs and Crossfire into spilling the beans for their escape plans. Later, after betraying them and transferring them to the raft, Rosalind staged her own death. Unbeknownst to both her and Spider-Man, though, Crossfire and the Controller are making their way through the building.
Meanwhile, Mandrill was left in charge of looking after the single mothers, which, if you remember what I mentioned before, ew.
Crossfire uses the Sonics to freeze Rosalind while the Controller places a disc on Spider-Man's head, explaining that not only does he now have access to Spidey's mind, but also his strength. However, it appears the Wallcrawler did finally learn his lesson and has called for backup. Cap, Iron Man, and the Shield forces arrive almost at the same point as the UFOs, and all hell begins to break loose. Vector comes crashing into the apartment and explains what it is he really wants and what is the linchpin to this entire thing. The UFOs want access to the ultrasonic chamber that Rosalind developed and William Cross stole to augment his own abilities. Simon knows that Rosalind was able to reacquire it when she sold out both gangs, and feels that the chamber could be used to restore the UFOs back to their human forms. Unfortunately, Rosalind destroyed the chamber as she was so ashamed by the amount of damage Crossfire caused with it. Vector is so irate that he loses control of his temper and manages to just toss everyone outside of the building. The constant vibrating is enough to remove the control disc from Spider-Man's head, and he manages to catch both Rosalind and an unconscious Crossfire as the apartment building collapses. Thankfully, all the single mothers did make it out unharmed, and the villains are taken into custody. That being said, even though Rosalind was trying to help people, she did break the law by stealing, well, pretty much everything, so she's forced to turn herself in, though Tony Stark does promise to rebuild the apartment complex. Or at least I hope he did. However, Cap is pleased with Spider-Man for his resourcefulness, and it seems that now the Wallcrawler really does understand what it's like to be part of a team.
And that concludes our look at Spider-Man Breakout. How was it? Well, on the plus side, I think the artwork is really top-notch in here. There's some really nice characterization through all of this. I do like the story arc Spider-Man goes through to learn to trust his fellow New Avengers so that, well, the job can actually get done. And to be honest, I like a lot of the fact that we're utilizing very underrated villains here. Like I said, the UFOs have never really been fully utilized too well, and I think they did a pretty good job here. Also, I would say Crossfire, a character I really didn't care for when it first appeared back in my Moon Knight review, and he came across as very believable and well-rounded. And in fact, all of the villains come across as very legit threats throughout most of this. And you know what? Like I said, I think this does a good job of picking up the storyline from New Avengers and showing Spider-Man functioning well in a team setting. Now again, if there is one real drawback, it's yeah, Rosalind Backus is just kind of stupid. And again, why set up shop in New York City if you know that's where the raft is located? And of course, the main reason is there would be a story if she set up shop somewhere else. So, yeah, it just, we have the character be stupid for the sake of plot purpose. And, yeah, that's just never good. Like I said, it's just really kind of annoying. But overall, that's really kind of a minor quibble in the main scheme of things. I'm going to give Spider-Man Breakout an A. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcapproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.